So let's talk about the Linux Foundation today. This is kind of a weird one because I'd love to just come out and say the Linux Foundation is the devil. And honestly, if it was a month or two ago, I probably would have made a clickbait title like that. But I want you to think outside the box. I want you to consider both sides of the coin instead of just considering, hey, this one viewpoint. I'm going to present a couple of viewpoints for you to follow and lay out what's bad about the Linux Foundation and what's good about it, because honestly, there's a lot of good and bad when it comes to it. So let's go ahead and jump into this. So let's first address the elephant in the room. If you've seen any like Linux Foundation conferences and stuff, or any of the leaders, they all use Windows PCs and Apple PCs. I think actually mainly Apple PCs, but I mean, it depends on the conference, I guess. And this is always a criticism. Almost none of them use Linux desktop, and that is just how it is. What do I think about this? And to me, it kind of makes sense, because most people think that because you work for a big company, therefore a big tech company, you know about tech. And that's just not true. Honestly, the bigger the company that you work for, typically the smaller the skill set of the person. A lot of times, just because you work for Google doesn't mean you know all about technology. A lot of times you would know a specific thing and be very good at one, maybe two sets of skills. But as far as a vast array, a lot of times you just didn't need to know all that other stuff. You only need to know about your one specific thing. And the same goes for leaders in the tech industry, and honestly, just business in general. Most of them are very good public speakers. Most of them have a competent set of skills when it comes to just basic computer work, but they're not that technical. And that's true of Jobs and Gates and all these other people. They're very good at, public speaking, but when it actually comes to actual knowledge, not so much. They just were very good at understanding customers. They were not technicians or geniuses, as some people have said. So I want to just dispel that myth, and the Linux Foundation is kind of the same way. These are just leaders from the tech industry, IBM, Cisco, Microsoft, Google, all of these people. Well, it's their leaders in the actual Linux Foundation that are being represented. And therefore, the Linux Foundation really isn't about Linux desktop at all. But that's not to say this is a negative aspect. It just is how it is. So a lot of people look at this and go, WTF? And I look at it and go, it makes sense. So I wanted to kind of give my viewpoint on this. Do I think they should all use Linux desktop? Yes. Do I think they should learn about Linux desktop? Yes. Will it probably happen? No, because they don't care. So let's go ahead and get that out of the way and just say, hey, these guys are not usually using Linux desktop, and it's because they just don't know about Linux desktop. Maybe one day, many years from now, when most of the world's running Linux desktop, that'll change. But for now, these guys will be using what the masses use. So I just want to push this out. Now let's get into the bad stuff about the Linux Foundation, because really, I've talked about, hey, they don't use Linux desktop, but a lot of people don't understand what the Linux Foundation is. And really, it's a kind of a company that's established, a nonprofit company that's established to help open source ecosystems. What does that mean? Well, they help the Linux project by funding it. Like, they pay Linus Torvalds' salary in a lot of instances and help fund its development, which is great. They also help fund like Node.js and I think Kubernetes a little bit, and some other open source ecosystems that are established in the world. So that's pretty cool. But with that, you also have all the people funding this are from big companies that have proprietary software, and in some instances have ulterior motives. So what exactly are those ulterior motives? And I'm going to go ahead and pull up a rather negative article about the Linux Foundation, just so you can see it, and I'll link it down in the description below. So it's run by these proprietary giants. They don't use Linux Desktop, which I already kind of touched. And what happens is they have something called open washing of proprietary software, such as exFAT recently with Microsoft and other things that has happened. And you can read through this article. I'll put it down below as well. And you can see all the different things they've done. Now, they'll push their own stuff like Visual Studio Code and SQL Server and other proprietary software that's kind of mentioned in this article. But overall, what about the Linux Foundation is good and bad? And this guy says, well, they're using it to just kind of as a PR place in some instances. And in some instances, I think this guy is right. There's some truth to this article. But I also kind of wanted to say, hey, there's another side to this coin where these people are doing 100% proprietary software and evil in some instances. Yes, they are promoting their own products and pushing it on the open source community, which is kind of silly in my view, but I'm not going to complain about it either, because to push it on the open source community, you need to open source it in a lot of instances. So that's kind of a negative article. And honestly, my take on it is, this is absolutely true, but I mean, it's to be expected. These companies paid millions of dollars to be on the Linux Foundation, and they have some influence over it. But they're not influencing Linux to do certain negative things. There's no Microsoft backdoor into Linux. They're not paying Linus Torvalds to develop a proprietary software for Linux. These types of things aren't happening with the foundation. So I'm going to dispel all that now. That's not to say bad things aren't happening, such as the open washing that this article talked about. That was mainly just saying, they use some of this as a PR stunt to try and as good favor in some instances, but also to help lift up some other proprietary software like MS SQL that has really started to decrease in usage as MySQL has become a lot more prevalent or prevalent in the industry. But, these types of things are to be expected. You can't bring in these people that have worked for proprietary giants all their life and then expect them to lift up Linux Desktop or lift up open source software over their own proprietary stuff they've spent decades building. I get their whole point, their PR purpose, and there's probably some good intentions behind this, but there's also that negative intention. And I agree with that. I mean, I think everyone should be made aware of that. But more so than that, I think we really need to get the Linux Foundation to take Linux Desktop seriously, because to them, it's just nothing. Most of them don't even know what it is. Most of them don't even know it is a choice between Microsoft or Apple and Linux Desktop. It's just not taken seriously by these partners or these people in charge at the Linux Foundation, which is a bit sad. I think that is really the bigger point in all the bad parts of this. So with all that said, there's nothing extremely negative or bad about the Linux Foundation. I want to talk more about the good side now, because based on this, I'm a little worried about what their influences do and how they're funding projects, how they're going about, influencing the Linux community. But let's see what they're doing on the good side of things. And we need to be cognizant of the bad, but we also need to not ignore the good things that are done by the Linux Foundation. So as far as the good things, well, they help fund the Linux kernel. The Linux kernel would be farther back, obviously, because Linus Torvalds wouldn't be working full-time on the kernel without a paycheck. And they funded a lot of other open source ecosystems, such as like Node.js, and they've helped develop the Linux kernel and also this aspect of it. So the Linux Foundation is really good in this aspect, but there's also more things that are happening in private. They help with open source projects and distributions of Linux Desktop. Whether people know it or not, a lot of Linux distributions actually donate directly to the Linux Foundation. All their donations actually flow to the Linux Foundation instead of an independent entity or a private corporation or a nonprofit in their home states. And the reason for this being is for tax purposes. because I spoke with a developer for a major distribution. I say it here, but I didn't ask if I could actually, say, hey, this is what's up. But he basically told me, hey, I would love to create our specific one here and do a nonprofit and run that entire company and accept all the donations into it. But at the end of the day, I'd be paying something like 20% tax by doing that, by putting it all through the Linux Foundation and its nonprofit and how big it is and a lot of its influence and its location in the world. He says he really only has like about a 5% fee instead of that 20% fee as far as the taxes go. So this is a huge difference and a huge boon. It means a lot of these distributions can grow faster by funneling their donations through the Linux Foundation and operating out of the Linux Foundation. So the downside of this is they can also be influenced by these bigger companies while this happens. So it's something to keep an eye on, but we can't just completely negate the good aspects of this, because without it, one, I think we'd be in a lot further back. But we also need to look at the influence that is being done by the Linux Foundation in regards to all these projects that they're a part of. And it's something at the end of the day, my actual thought process of this was my knee jerk was just to say it was a bad foundation. I think having all this negative influence in Linux is a bad thing. But at the same time, a lot of these are big companies. They have a lot of money. They do a lot of things for the community. They have a lot of financing that helps projects in the community. And without the Linux Foundation, let's say it was completely gone, these projects would be a lot less further along than they are. So a lot of it would be stuck in a long time in the past, where a lot of these companies have been able to go full time or been able to be pushed forward a little more because of this funding. So I'm a little conflicted. I can't really say, hey, the Linux Foundation is good, or I can't say it's bad either. There's both good and bads to it. And we just need to be aware of who's in it, what kind of influences they're doing. And if they're doing negative things, we need to know about it. But at the end of the day, I don't think of the Linux Foundation as Linux Foundation. I think of it as an open source I look at it as a foundation that helps open source projects, and that is funded by a bunch of big companies that have a lot of business interests that go against Linux. This is worrisome, but at the same time, it's almost like a necessary evil because we can grow so much faster with it. But again, we need to do our due diligence and be aware of these negative aspects. So at the end of the day, I'm thankful for the Linux Foundation, but at the same time, I'm a little bit worried about it. I wish usually I can come out here and just say I hate this certain thing. And this is one of those ones where I really anticipated me coming out and just saying I don't like this company because of who's in it. And I don't like a lot of these companies that are in the Linux Foundation. But at the same time, I can't condemn them because a lot of their actions have been good. It looks really bad from the outside looking in, but after I dug a little deeper, I gotta say, I'm kind of thankful that they're there. I'm thankful for a lot of the support they've given a lot of the open source projects. And I really hope they keep on the straight and narrow, but it's something that does worry me and something that I will keep a close eye on. But I didn't uncover anything that I thought was so detrimental that I need to make a video saying they're the devil, even though I'd like to make that video. But in the end, they're not really. They're there to help, but at the same token, we got to look at who's helping us. It's something that I'm just like, I don't know about this. I don't know about this. And that's kind of where I'm going to end this video. I wish I could give you more than that, but I can't. But with all that, let me know your thoughts down in the comments section. And if anybody from the Linux Foundation watches this video, start using Linux Desktop, or at least know what the hell it's about, man. That's all I ask, because you guys are a little bit lost in that regard, and it's a little bit shameful. But other than that, that's my only scolding I have for that individual. So with that, a big shout out to all my patrons. I couldn't make any of these videos without your support, so thank you. And I'll see you in the next one.